Hi guys, welcome back to
The 18 works.
I hope that you're all doing okay. Today we're gonna be discussing
The
menstrual
menstrual
cycle.
cycle.
So let's get to it.
So, remember that the menstrual cycle is under the topic of human reproduction. So, we'll be looking at the background of this topic. We'll also look at the hormones, or rather the messengers involved in this menstrual cycle. We'll also look at the two cycles that we have along with their phases. We'll also look at fertilization, which occurs in the menstrual cycle, not in the human reproduction. And lastly, we'll look at negative feedback mechanism that occurs between some of the hormones that are included in the menstrual cycle. So, how would you relate to the menstrual cycle? So, think of it as the moon cycle, because with your moon, you have the night of the new moon, you have your crescent moon, your quarter moon, your gibbous moon, and your full moon. And all of these take time, they have certain events occurring before they can actually occur. Same applies with the menstrual cycle. There are certain phases and cycles that complete this menstrual cycle, and it's a 28 days cycle that occurs every month. It occurs where? In the female reproductive system, specifically under in the uterus and in the ovaries. Now, you must also know that the menstrual cycle is associated with menstruation, which occurs in girls. Know that it does not occur in during menopause. Now, remember that menopause is whereby now you've reached the age of aging, right? You are now old and you cannot bear children anymore, right? So, the menstrual cycle basically it's a what? The menstrual cycle is a period or a process of discharge of blood and other things from the vagina of a woman. Okay, it is a natural periodical process that brings changes in the female reproductive system. Right. Now, let us look at the hormones that are involved in the menstrual cycle. We firstly have your follicle stimulating hormone, which is secreted by the pituitary gland. I hope you still remember it. That is part of your endocrine system. So, the FSH, what's the purpose of FSH? It helps in the development of a Graafian follicle, and that Graafian follicle will later be used to do what? As a gland to secrete estrogen, which helps in the primary thickening of the endometrium. Now remember, we said that there are two phases, there are two cycles, which is the uterine cycle and the ovarian cycle, and each happen where in their respective places, namely the uterus as well as the ovaries, and we find our endometrium where in the uterus. Then we have the luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone is a hormone that is secreted by the pituitary gland, and it is stimulating ovulation, which starts from day 13, and there's a high peak of luteinizing hormone in day 14, and it decreases gradually into day 15. We'll learn more about that as we continue. We also have progesterone, which is secreted by a torn Graafian follicle, which is known as the corpus luteum, and it helps in the secondary thickening of the endometrium. And sometimes it does what? It maintains pregnancy.
Okay, so now we're going to focus on the ovarian cycle which take place in the ovaries. Ovarian cycle is a cycle that consists of three phases, which include the development of the follicle, the phase where the follicle develops, the release of the mature ovum, which we know as ovulation, which happens during day 14, and also the development of a corpus luteum. So now we're going to focus more on the development of the follicle. We need to know how the follicle develops. So the primary follicle, it matures and develops into a vascular Graafian follicle. And the graphene follicle, we're going to have the graphene follicle containing a mature ovum. We need to know that the primary follicle, it develops into a vascular graphene follicle under the influence of FSH, which is a follicle stimulating hormone. So the FSH needs to be produced for the follicle to be developed. During day 14, we have the mature ovum that was in the graphene follicle. It will be released by the graphene follicle under the influence of luteinizing hormone, meaning that the luteinizing hormone needs to be produced for ovulation to take place. We are now going to focus on the development of the corpus luteum. We need to know how the corpus luteum develops. So the first thing that happened, the graphene follicle, it becomes ruptured immediately after releasing the ovum. Immediately after ovulation, the graphene follicle, it becomes ruptured. Then we're going to have the luteinizing hormone, which will convert the ruptured graphene follicle into a corpus luteum, whereby we are going to have corpus luteum producing some hormones such as the estrogen and the progesterone, which maintains pregnancy. So we need to know that if the fertilization do not occur, if fertilization do not take place, then our corpus luteum will degenerate.
The uterine cycle is a natural process that occurs within the uterus as it prepares itself for potential pregnancy so that the embryo can implant and grow well. It changes throughout the month and it is influenced by hormones like estrogen and progesterone. So this cycle occurs in 4 simple steps. So let us now explore at how the uterus prepares itself for potential pregnancy. So we know that after ovulation has taken place, the graphene follicles ruptures to release a hormone called corpus luteum. So this hormone also produces a hormone which is known as progesterone. So progesterone results into the endometrium being thickened further.
Now let us talk about the negative feedback mechanism. A negative feedback mechanism is an interaction between two hormones where an increase in one hormone stimulates an increase in the other hormone, which inhibits the first hormone, thus restoring balance. The negative feedback system can be seen in the hormonal control of the menstrual cycle, where progesterone influences the secretion of the follicle stimulating hormone. In short, we know it as FSH. Now let us talk hormone P. Let us talk about the lows and peaks of progesterone. In the luteal phase right after ovulation, this is our luteal phase because it happens in the uterine stage. So, in the luteal phase after ovulation, we expect the corpus callosum to produce progesterone in order to prepare the uterine lining, or rather we can call it the endometrium lining, for possible implantation. As it is visible enough in the graph, we can see that progesterone, it is at its peak. So at this point, we regard progesterone higher. As a result, the higher levels of progesterone will inhibit the secretion of FSH FSH from the pituitary gland. So no follicles will develop, and if follicles do not develop, it means that no ovum will be formed or rather released. And now let us talk about the follicular phase. Our follicular phase is this phase right before ovulation. So in our follicular phase, progesterone is much lower. They are naturally low. This shows that a woman or a girl is basically not pregnant or was on their periods, and obviously no pregnancy was maintained, because we know that progesterone is a hormone that maintains pregnancy. Therefore, a woman or a girl was not pregnant, implantation did not occur. So now the levels of progesterone, the low levels of progesterone signifies that the secretion of FSH was not inhibited. So we can see now FSH is gradually rising because progesterone is low, and it was not at all inhibited. As a result, the follicles develop. The primary follicle develop into a Graafian follicle. Thus, the ovum was formed and was released for ovulation. So, ladies and gentlemen, this was all about our negative feedback mechanism.
Now we will discuss fertilization within the menstrual cycle and how exactly does it occur. So we're gonna first discuss what happens in the body when pregnancy occurs, or in simpler terms, takes place. So the first thing we'll notice is that the progesterone levels in the body will increase. Now, if you guys can just look at the slide, look at the graph, you can see that as the weeks go by, the level of progesterone increases. And that that increase leads to the reduction or the lowering of the follicle stimulating hormones, but you've already learned it now. We're gonna call it FSH. Now, once these FSH levels are decreased, that means there will be no follicles developing, because that's the role of the FSH, to develop follicles. So if there are no follicles developing, that means there'll be no Graafian follicle that develops. And obvious, now you can see a pattern. If there's no Graafian follicle, then what won't be there? The ovum. So when pregnancy does occur, you can see that there will be no ovulation that happens in the body. And it's important to note that the corpus luteum remains and produces progesterone. So that is something that's helping with the production of progesterone in the body. And you can see the last line there. It's the endometrium wall that helps maintain the pregnancy so it won't break down, which means that females will not get their period for the months that they are pregnant. Now, if you look at the next slide, you can see that what happens in the body when there's no pregnancy. That's the question that one understand. So, first of all, we already discussed in the previous slide, corpus luteum is now going to shrink. It's gone, disappeared, vamush. It's gone forever because it's what produces progesterone. But now, if there's nothing to maintain, no pregnancy to maintain, there's no use for it in the body. So this allows for the levels of progesterone to disappear, to be lowered, and in turn, now this raises the follicle stimulating hormone levels in the body, FSH, which allows for follicles and Graafian follicles to develop, which, as we discussed, leads to ovulation. So you can see again in the picture there, look at the corpus luteum after day 15 to day 28. You can see that it's just shrinking and shrinking until eventually gone. And I want you guys to think of ovulation, or the menstrual cycle rather, as an actual cycle or a system even. So you can see that the input would be the follicles and the development of the follicles, which is due to FSH. So that's your input. It's what starts the whole thing. The process would be ovulation because ovums need to be made every single month unless there would be a baby. Okay? And then the output is either fertilization or no fertilization. So that is the main system, the main goal of the menstrual cycle. Essentially, it's to get to fertilization or no fertilization. And depending on whether fertilization happens or doesn't happen, you're going to see the feedback and the response of that. Now, I want you guys to pause the video and to be able to look at these questions and answer them. You can use the slides that I've given you to be able to answer them. Thank you.